What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHogs42 on the internet. And today I want to talk about a card that is coming out in Wilds of Eldraine that I think has an opportunity to be one of the stronger white cards in the set in general. And honestly, it's just fantastic. The card that we're talking about is Werefox Bodyguard. I'm never sure how much lead in to give. At the end of the day, let's cut to it. This card is a 2/2 with flash for 1 white. When Werefox Bodyguard enters the battlefield, exile up to one other target non-fox creature until Werefox Bodyguard leaves the battlefield. And you can pay 1 and a white, sacrifice it, you gain 2 life. Honestly, I think this card is truly fantastic for a myriad of reasons. That said, this is not a card that new players should probably pick up right away because there's a lot of intricacy in how you can play it. Well, actually, you know what? No. Who am I to gatekeep? At the end of the day, if you're even a new player and you want to get your hands on this, please give it a try. Just know there's a lot of depth to how you can play this card, and it's going to unlock and only get better as you discover those lines. For example, so we have a 2/2 flash here, right? Bottom line, the floor on this is on your opponent's end step, you can flash it in and you have a 2/2 beater online. Assume there are no other creatures online. You just got a 2/2 that can now go on the offensive. You could also flash it in order to block or remove an attacking creature from combat. And honestly, I think that's really where people are going to be using this. This is tempo removal, and that's something that we're very familiar with. So you'll note it doesn't say a creature you control, so it can be your opponent's creatures, and oftentimes will, but it doesn't restrict you to your opponent's creatures either. Therefore, there are plenty of instances in which you can use it on your own things. So if your opponent tries to use a kill spell on one of your strong creatures, you can flash in Werefox Bodyguard and exile your own creature, at which time Werefox Bodyguard now, the moment it dies, the other creature comes back. So you can sacrifice it in response if you just want the other creature online. Assume I have a Sheoldred the Apocalypse down, right? Assuming I'm playing some kind of Orzhov thing. I have a Sheoldred the Apocalypse down. My opponent tries to hit it with the Go for the Throat. I flash in Werefox Bodyguard, exile Sheoldred. Well, on my opponent's end step, or I don't know, whatever the next step may be, I go ahead and pay 2, sacrifice Werefox Bodyguard. Guess what? Shelly's back. I spent 5 mana in total to gain 2 life and prevent that kill spell from going off. So that's not a super efficient way to use the card, but in certain games, that will give you the edge. And the cost of including Werefox Bodyguard in your deck is fairly minimal because that's only one scenario in which you're getting value. You know, if you have a protection spell like a Tamiyo Safekeeping, yeah, it only costs 1 mana, but it only does the one thing. You know, a Tamiyo Safekeeping cannot be turned sideways to get in the last 2 points of damage and win the game. Werefox Bodyguard can. It can also be used to give you the last 2 points of life to prevent an attack that would otherwise be lethal from being lethal. And that's fantastic. Werefox Bodyguard also helps protect from board wipes, and more specifically, exile board wipes. Let's go back to the situation where I have a Sheoldred the Apocalypse online and I want it to survive. If my opponent plays a Sunfall or a Farewell, usually that spells doom for my Sheoldred the Apocalypse, which would make me sad because that's a good card and I want to have it, dang it. Well, Werefox Bodyguard can come in, exile Sheoldred. Then when the Werefox Bodyguard itself gets exiled, it triggers the leaves the battlefield part of its effect, and Sheoldred just comes back. And so, and the funny part is that's actually not even considered a triggered ability. It just happens. And so there we go. So everything got exiled except Sheoldred. And there's a decent chance that your opponent is willing to rock a Sunfall to get rid of only a Sheoldred. If it's the only thing on your board, all of a sudden this effectively counters what they're doing. They get a 1/1 incubator, I guess, in the case of Sunfall, so that's not nothing. But here we have a situation where we have a card that, by the way it functions, can actually deal with like a Farewell. Like if you're running a creature-based deck, this can respond to Farewell and produce equity on your side of the board. A lot of the times when a control player casts Farewell, or Sunfall for that matter, oftentimes they're tapping out to do so, and you may have lethal the following turn. Well, Werefox Bodyguard, it may not guarantee that you get lethal on the crackback, but there's gonna be a crackback where there otherwise wouldn't be. So that seems pretty freaking cool. Now, I'm locking into how defensive this card is, right? But obviously, it can also be used offensively into really good effect. So if you have an attacking force, if you're in like a white aggro strategy, you're rocking some mono white weenies. It's a strategy we all know and love, right? You got your soldiers, you've got your There are other creature types that are oftentimes show up in there. You got your knights, maybe. That's going to be a thing. Well, the Werefox Bodyguard themselves is, in fact, a knight. Also, fun fact, a fox and an elf, which I think is very notable as well. More to come on that in a second. So if you're having an aggressive strategy, we've seen cards like this be very effective because you're able to apply a lot of pressure early. And as you're applying pressure early, your opponent is trying to establish blockers often enough, or a lot of removal. They're trying to survive, right? That's the goal. 3-mana sweepers become very, very difficult to deal with. But for the most part, the way that people respond is by establishing blockers of their own. That is a very common way to deal with this. And even in the current mono-white strategies, or even the Azorius and Esper strategies, we see that. Cards like Spirited Companion or Ambitious Farmhand are phenomenal at preventing early aggression and surviving into turn 5 and 6 when they can hit those sweepers to really knock the aggro deck down and, stay, establish a winning position. Well, Werefox Bodyguard gets those blockers out of the way. In the case of Spirited Companion and Ambitious Farmhand, it's a little less optimal because there are those ETBs that the opponent might be able to get value on later. But if you just need to push damage, the Werefox Bodyguard gets creatures out of the way. And we've seen cards do this in that exact same deck many times in the past. The obvious comparison that I'm going to make is Brutal Cathar. This is a card that for 3, it enters the battlefield, it exiles something your opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. With Brutal Cathar, you also have the dream of being able to flip it multiple times in order to, exile multiple creatures. Like, that's possible with this card. The Werefox Bodyguard doesn't give you that. However, the Werefox Bodyguard does give you flash. And frankly, I think that's better. Also, there's a downside with Brutal Cathar where if it's already nighttime, if someone has established the day-night cycle and it happens to be nighttime, when you play Brutal Cathar, it doesn't exile anything. The ETB doesn't occur because it doesn't appear on the backside. And so you end up with a 3/3 first striker, ward, pay 3 life. Not a bad card, and it can oftentimes block equitably, and if you can cast another spell, then it flips to daytime on your opponent's upkeep, and you're fine. But obviously that's the downside. We've all had those games where you're like, okay, as long as I remove that thing, I can swing for lethal. Brutal Cathar, and it enters in on the night side. It's like, oh, dang it. Well, Werefox Bodyguard doesn't have that problem. It's a minimal problem. Cathar's still a great card, don't get me wrong, but you don't get that. Now, the other thing that you don't get with Werefox Bodyguard that you did get with Cathar is those situations where I have a Brutal Cathar. I cast it out, I exile your thing. Cool. You go to your turn. You play a Brutal Cathar, exile my Brutal Cathar, get your other thing back. All right, I'm going to go to my turn. Then I'm going to exile, I'm going to use a Brutal Cathar to exile your Brutal Cathar, get back into play my other Brutal Cathar, then exile one of your things. We've seen those stacks. Those are absolutely a thing, and they're very frustrating to deal with. Well, Werefox Bodyguard has a failsafe in place that prevents that from being a thing. Because it can only exile non-fox creatures until Werefox Bodyguard leaves the battlefield. That's probably intended because you can target your own things. So if you have multiple Werefox Bodyguards, you can do weird chains that you would have complete control over. And the possibilities for like very powerful combos are very real. Especially when you add in, the now banned from standard Fable, the Mirror Breaker. You would be able to do some very weird, very powerful things with that. And so they didn't want us to have that fun. So here we are. But as a result, keep in mind, if the opponent's creature that you're trying to remove happens to be a fox for one reason or another, Werefox Bodyguard cannot target it. That includes changelings, so they're all out of the mix, as well as there are some foxes out there right now, especially now that Neon Dynasty didn't rotate. There were a number of cards from Neon Dynasty that happened to be foxes, because on Kamigawa you had the Kitsune, the fox people, so that's a thing. Most notably Lightpaws, who is still standard legal despite the fact that they haven't really seen any play in the meta. Just know if you're doing Lightpaws brews, if the Werefox Bodyguard becomes popular removal, and I anticipate that it will, then your Lightpaws is safe from it, which is pretty cool. There's still a million other pieces of removal you got to worry about, but not this one. That's kind of neat, right? Anyway, so yeah, I think Werefox Bodyguard is just downright excellent. Now, the other thing that I want to point out about this that is not clear upon looking at the art and reading the text box, I teased at it earlier, it's also an elf. Its types are elf, fox, knight. So obviously if you care about any of those types, you can do some really cool things. Knights have been a thing in Eldraine's past, so presumably that will be a benefit. And obviously if you have like a Knight's EDH deck or something, this is kind of a no-brainer auto-include. Like if you're already doing the knight thing, get this in there, it rules. But the one I want to point out is elf. because elf decks often do not include white. That is not a typically elven color. In recent years, we've seen them really lean into Golgari for elves. Elves have often been, green and black, or simply mono green. That's usually where we see it. That said, in standard right now, and especially now the rotation's not happening, there are a lot of very, very strong elves, and some of them happen to be in Naya specifically. I truly believe that the core of some kind of Naya elf deck could absolutely exist and could be very strong. We have cards like Leafcrown Visionary, where all other elves get +1/+1, and then whenever you cast an elf, you can pay green and draw a card. It's a Lord and a draw spell, or, a draw engine even, for 2 mana. It's 2 green, so if you're trying to rock 3 colors, it becomes a little tricky, but mana bases in standard right now are absolutely phenomenal. So with things like Jetmir's Garden and the Cabaret Courtyard, you can make it work. It's not that hard. Then the other one that I want to call out is Fleetfoot Dancer. This is a 4/4 trample lifelink haste elf druid for 1 red, green, white. So if you're in Naya, this is probably one of the strongest aggro threats you could possibly be running anyway, and a ton of people are sleeping on it. I think this card is absolutely excellent, and for some reason, it just never found a home. The Naya decks just have not had a chance to shine because removal is so strong and ubiquitous. Like, everybody has ways to deal with, 4+ toughness 4-drops just because Sheoldred's around. Because Sheoldred the Apocalypse is so popular and exists in the meta, everybody is main decking a ton of ways to destroy or exile target creature. And as a result, all of that hits Fleetfoot Dancer, and it never had an opportunity to really shine. Well, and then the Naya deck didn't exist prior to Sheoldred showing up either. But all the same, I think this card is very, very strong. I think it's really freaking good. If it drops and connects, it represents a potential 8 life point swing, which can be absolutely massive. And it also buffs with elves. We also have Rocco Cabaret Caterer, as well as the other Rocco from Aftermath as well. Rocco is an elf in Naya. So this allows you to toolbox your deck. Granted, it would cost you 6 to cast out Rocco and then tutor up the Werewolf Bodyguard, but you could do it. I think that's really freaking cool. Having that option in your deck is really powerful. Rocco could also grab the Leafcrown Visionary. You kind of get where I'm going with this, right? Like, I feel like this has the potential to be a very strong creature-based strategy. The only question: can creature-based strategies exist in the current standard? Up until now, the answer has been absolutely no. And so, yes, if you began furiously typing that comment, feel free to continue it and post it. I would really appreciate that, because even if you're telling me I'm an idiot, engagement really helps. But all the same, I know creature-based strategies are not particularly strong right now in standard because removal and sweepers are everywhere and they are very powerful. But all the same, I want to believe, and I think, if aggro is possible and white is doing that, at least even as a part of the story, I think Werefox Bodyguard has an opportunity to be in the mix as one of the best versions of that we've ever seen, honestly. This gives me big vibes. Another card that I'm realizing I didn't touch on is Sigrid God-Favored. This is a card that I also think is very highly slept on, but far more situational because you can only exile attacking or blocking creatures. So Sigrid is a combat trick, whereas the the Werewolf Bodyguard, you can do it whenever. The creature does not have to be attacking or blocking. Now, Sigrid God-Favored, the fact that they have Flash, First Strike, and Pro Gods is pretty awesome because you can do some really silly things with that. I have had a number of decks where I put Sigrid God-Favored in my sideboard against aggro. Because when a red deck is swinging at you with 2 3/2s or 2 2/2s on turn 3, being able to flash in Sigrid, exile one of them, and First Strike kill the other one feels really good. Really good. It can actually be a devastating blowout to that kind of deck, and therefore sideboard. It's something that I like in older formats. Well, Werewolf Bodyguard not having First Strike, obviously that doesn't help it for that application. But even so, if your opponent is swinging with 2 creatures and one of them's a 1/1, you can just freely eat it and exile the other one. If the other one's also a token, Werefox Bodyguard, I think I've said werewolf for at least the last few minutes. I'm sorry about that. Werefox Bodyguard has an opportunity to exile tokens, and the opponent will never get them back, as is the case for these kind of O-ring style effects. So all in all, I think this card is one of the strongest versions of this effect that we've seen in a while, and there are a lot of them. Honestly, this is the best 3-drop version of this that we've seen since, I think, Skyclave Apparition. Skyclave Apparition was a very powerful card that allowed you to hit other permanent types, not just creatures, and I think that gives it kind of an edge. And the fact that the opponent never got the thing back is also very, very powerful. This is different, but honestly, I think just as good for the roles that it serves. I really like it, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it. So thank you for checking out this edition of the Overthinking MTG podcast. I guess I had a lot of thoughts on this one, and I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of other Wilds of Eldraine cards. So if you're interested in that, drop a follow, like, subscribe, whatever it is called on the platform on which you are consuming this, as well as if you drop some engagement and tell people that we're doing what we're doing. I'd really appreciate it. That really helps. So thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.